Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Willie. Thank you, Tisa. It's really good to be here. I've been looking forward to being with all of you through the cold winter, I should say cold, dry winter in Colorado. We envied your snowfall. And we're looking forward to a great firefighting season in the mountains west of Denver. Wakondo monchiro wakondo utsere tachi topo wakondo gi blinde we akno we chiko eski ikoe. The dongyo. The dongyo. This is kind of crazy stuff. Being in Wajaji in India and coming to a university and teaching. Coming to colleges and universities and giving lectures. But I've got a buddy that helps me do this. Came around about 15 years ago, and if you'll indulge me, I'd like to make sure that he feels welcome here. His name is Shomikati Sabe. He's a black coyote. And this is coyote work that I'm doing. And you Indian students, that's the work you're doing, whether you know it or not. You're learning a discourse that isn't yours. And you've got to go back and somehow learn how to talk to your own people again, which isn't a given. So let me call in Shomikati Witsiko and ask him to be with us. We are watching the dongyo. We are watching the dongyo. We are watching Witsiko. Shomikati sape we are watching. We are watching the dongyo. We are watching the dongyo. We are watching Witsiko. Shomikati sape we are watching. We are watching the dongyo. We are watching the dongyo. We are watching the dongyo. We are watching Witsiko. Shomikati sape we are watching. We are watching the dongyo. We are watching the dongyo. We are watching the Witsiko. Shomikati sape we are watching. We are watching the dongyo. In the early 1880s, as the continent became more and more secure for Christian habitation, as y'all took over more and more of our lands, it became apparent to the missionaries and the government policy wonks that the job wasn't finished yet. In order to make sure that they got the rest of our land, they needed to come up with a scheme, a scam, a plan. So they gathered themselves together at Albert Smiley's hotel at Lake Mohawk in New York, and they called themselves the Friends of the Indians. And they met for more than 3 decades, trying to solve what they called the Indian problem. We had another way of referring to it, the white problem. So in 1883, they met and began to develop this platform, this plan. They had given up on civilizing adult Indians. Our minds are too far gone, too entrenched in those other ways, so they devised a program for opening boarding schools. Churches already had some, but it spread like wildfire in the 1880s, with the U.S. government getting involved in the mix and opening government boarding schools where Indian kids were taken away from their families, locked up, incarcerated essentially for 12 years from age 6 to age 18, without recourse to a public trial of any kind, where they were taught the rest of the Friends of the Indians platform for civilizing the Indians. Basically, education was a major part of their ideology. They also were intent on Christianizing Indians. This was part of the federal policy now. Freedom of religion works for the rest of you. It doesn't work too well for Indians, right? Our ceremonies were outlawed right up into the 1930s and were de facto outlawed after that until the rise of the American Indian movement in 1969. That's when a lot of our ceremonies began to come back out of the closet. And the third plank was to teach Indians how to become radical Christian individuals. Something that only happened in Christianity after the disaster, the crisis of 1348 to 52, when individualism took hold in Europe and transformed Europe into the Renaissance the century after. And that crisis, you all probably don't even remember what it was, huh? Some Yale student must remember those dates. It's called the plague, the Black Death, when in 4 years' time, about a quarter of the population of Europe died, which had all kinds of deleterious effects besides dying. It gave rise to a massive concentration of wealth among fewer and fewer people. It created, I think, the individualism that we see come full blossom in the Renaissance. Remember, in the Renaissance is when artists began to sign their paintings. They didn't do that before. They began to sign their music. So all of a sudden we remember who the artists are from the 15th century on. Well, these wise Christian politicians decided that's what we need to do to Indians, is teach them. And they reiterated what Carl Schuros had said a couple years before, and George Mennypenny, Commissioner of Indian Affairs in the 1850s, had said, to civilize Indians, we need to teach them to say mine instead of ours. Me instead of us. I instead of we. And the fourth plank that was important to them builds on this radical individualism. They decided they needed to teach us the private ownership of property. And out of that came the Dawes Act in 1887 that divided up Indian land into separate parcels, acreages, and were given then to individual Indians on the rolls, which made it more accessible to white profiteers who could come in and swindle Indians out of their private property now, because you couldn't do that as long as we held the land in common. Not only that, they decided Indians only needed 160 acres each. And the rest, there's a lot of excess left over. We can move in white farmers next to the Indians, and they'll be role models to teach Indians agriculture, because Indians are hunter-gatherers, right? That's what some people call bovine scatology. Indians were great agriculturalists. But to put Indians in their place, you know, the white Christian romances, Indians at best were horticulturalists, not agriculturalists. And we come up with this new category to divide agriculturalists from horticulturalists. Never mind that people whose villages George Washington burned to the ground had 2-year supplies of corn in their warehouses. And no Indian ever went hungry until the invasion came. Well, what we're dealing with here is the imposition of worldview on Indian people, and I want to talk about worldview for a minute, because it's critical to understand that we're dealing with two very different ways of seeing the world around you. Very different ways. We might look at the same thing and see very different things and describe them differently. When Reverend James Dorsey, an ethnographer, Episcopal minister, came to Osage villages, he notices the villages are divided in two. And he got that right. And he drew pictures of our villages with the road down the middle. Only instead of the road following the path of the sun from east to west, he had it going north to south. Inconceivable for Wajaji people, for whom the earth division and the sky division are separated by the path of the sun. I mean, it's of cosmic importance to get that right. And here he was in the village, not one, but he was in Osage villages, Kansa villages, Quapaw villages, all our relatives who did things the same way and got it wrong. But these friends of the Indian were clear that Indians had to change the way they thought anyway, and so they imposed Christianity on us. They imposed radical individualism and got federal funding to do that, and were able to funnel federal funding into the hands of church missionaries. So the confusion of church and state was perfectly okay as long as we were taking land away from Indian people. Now, having said that much, we're not individualists. We're what I call communityists, and every ceremony we have builds on that sense of communal whole, of community. Not communism or communitarianism. Those words are already used up in Christian discourse, so I use the word communityist to describe it. That means we held land in common. That means I could plant my corn over here, as long as you're not planting your corn over there. And next spring, if you want to plant your corn over there, I'll plant mine over here. Or we'll plant it together and come up with this storehouse filled with the riches of corn mother. The first missionary to come into any Indian community disrupted that sense of balance that we had. When I said my opening words, I called on Tatsi Topa, Okondiki, the energies of the four directions. Because that's our balance. The other thing that disrupted Indian people is this move to Christianity introduced a whole different notion of reality built upon hierarchy. Everything becomes hierarchy. And I want to say something about a piece I wrote as an illustration of that. The piece, you all read it, to Why I Don't Believe in a Creator. Wherever I go, especially church people, not so much in universities, but church people want to know, what did you call God? What's your word for God? As if it's the most natural thing in the world. Everybody has God, everybody has religion, everybody has spirituality. No, those are all Euro-Christian inventions. Not everybody has a God. Oh, I say to them, you mean what word in our language did the missionaries pick to represent that Euro-Christian commodity called, that you all call God with a capital G? Yeah, well, Wakanda never meant that. It meant something entirely different. And in fact, modern science, modern physics particularly, astrophysics especially, are coming closer and closer to understanding that notion of Wakanda. That notion of the so-called Big Bang, their creation story. It's not our creation story. But it comes close in some ways to reflecting how we see ourselves. As astrophysicists want to say, we're all star matter. Essentially, that's the Big Bang Theory. We're all star matter. The Earth is part of that debris, detritus that came out of the Big Bang. Well, Osages know that. We know we came from the stars. The Iroquois Confederacy, those people know that. They came from above, led by Sky Woman, who came down first of all and started to build this continent on the back of the turtle. Hence we call this Turtle Island. Wakanda is that cosmic energy. It's not a person. It can't be codified as God. And as soon as you make me codify it as God, then I've got to go into certain gyrations to reconstruct a worldview that is no longer one of harmony and balance, but is one of hierarchy. Right? As soon as we summon a God, we're talking about a hierarchical construction of reality. And in the classical European sense, it's God, human beings, the rest of creation, animals first, and tree slugs and amoeba last, I guess. Whereas for us, those are our relatives too. We're no better than those tree slugs. I got accosted by a theologian at one conference it was an ecology conference. The theologian said, how about tree slugs? You don't think they're relatives, do you? Well, what is it about tree slugs that you think is so objectionable? Those are all our relatives. We're related to everything. And hence, our villages are places where authority gets dispersed among so many different players that no one is finally an autocrat in charge. And then they interrupt me again and say, but Tink, you had a chief. Oh, we were better than that. In every village, we had two. Kind of, as I said this morning, like having Donald Trump on Mondays and Hillary Clinton on Tuesdays. They took turns every other day being in charge. You can see they can't have much autocratic power if you're going to switch every other day. More than that, the Gaiga are men, and the real power, authority, in any Indian community resides in the domestic lodge, and it rests with women, not with men. All that gets disrupted when you introduce hierarchy. First of all, my next task is to pick a gender for this person up at the top, or thing, or whatever you're going to call it. But Christians usually envision God in their own image, so it's a person. And more than that, it's a male person. Until feminist theologians came along and started talking 40 years ago about the femininity of God. And of course, feminist theologians thought I was the cat's meow because I'm arguing against the maleness of God. And I had to stop and say, wait a minute, no, you're just replacing a male God with a female God. We're back in the same soup. It's just a woman at the top of the hierarchy. In our Osage way, we've got to have both. There has to be both male and female. Because our world is about twinned halves. It's a dualism, but not the oppositional dualism of classic Christian theology and history, going back to the times of Gnosticism was being born, of good versus evil, and it's still with us today, this good versus evil. U.S. foreign policy is predicated on exactly that construction of the universe and that theology, good versus evil. And of course, I'll give it away. The U.S. is good. For us, it's a paired dualism, or harmonious dualism. A dualism where you need both aspects in order to have a whole. You've got to have male and female. So our villages are divided in two, the sky people and the earth people. Because the two powers of Wakanda are the sky and the earth, grandfather and grandmother. To that extent, we call them grandfather and grandmother. Doesn't really work, but they are male and female for sure. But you can't have a ceremony where you summon one of them and not the other one. That would lead to disruption, a break in the balance and harmony of the whole. So Indian people may not have realized what was happening to them when the first missionaries came. But that's it. We were being taught to embrace this hierarchy. And as we were taught to embrace this hierarchy, we were taught to embrace the great Father who lived in some faraway place from us called Washington. And Indians, in order to humor, the treaty makers, called that person the great father, even though he's not my father. And what's so great about, Andrew Jackson, who's an Indian killer par excellence. What's so great about any of those presidents? When you peel back the onion, George Washington died in 1799, still in possession of title, piece of paper, to 49,000 acres of Indian land in the Ohio Valley. And he had constructed the war against the Ohio Valley even during the Revolution itself, because he had speculative land interests already staked out in the Ohio Valley. No friend of Indians, he. Thomas Jefferson, in some ways, was worse. Abraham Lincoln, within 6 days of signing the Emancipation Declaration, signed the death warrant of 39 Dakota Indians condemned to hang in Mankato, Minnesota in 1862, the day after Christmas. It's a great Christmas party in Mankato. They still celebrate it. Weird stuff. The Dakotas declared war against the United States because the U.S. hadn't lived up to its treaty promises and wasn't providing food. And the young men said, our babies are starving. We certainly need to go to war to reclaim what they promised us in the treaty when they took our land. So if it's that twinning principle of male and female, two halves of the village, people are living out that harmony and balance every day. In the old villages, not anymore, because our villages are now gone. They've been replaced by HUD housing in new villages and towns. But all the Tsecho lived in the north. All the Honka lived in the south. And in order to maintain harmony and balance, to give the lie to Claude Lévi-Strauss, who didn't know what to make of this. How can a people, remember the classic French anthropologist, how can people be divided and united at the same time? Open your eyes. All the Honkas slept on their right shoulder. All the Tsecho slept on their left shoulder. With their heads to the east. Now I'm turned around here because there are no mountains, so I don't know which is which. That's the east, that way? Oh, that way? Yeah. So they slept on opposite shoulders so that they were facing each other even through the night in their sleep. Now, when I say this is a worldview, it extends then to that unity even outside of the village. It extends to a unity with all of those relatives that became the founders of our clans. So I'm Eagle Clan. From the Honka division, the Earth division. And so we revere the eagle and call upon that relative, that close relative, the eagle, to help us. I have them right here with me. 3 of them actually who take care of me, especially when I travel. 2 grandfathers and 1 grandmother. My daughter is a different clan than I am. She's adopted. She's Buffalo Clan. Toka Ute. So when she moved in at the age of 4, just barely 4, I had to begin to teach her how to be Buffalo Clan. So I had to teach her, put your left shoe on first. Put your left leg in the pant first. Put your left arm through first. And then your right. That way you'll always remember what division you came from, what clan you are. And she's super proud of being Wishaji, super proud of being Toka Utsele Buffalo Clan. So she's very careful to do all of that. I do it just the opposite. Because I'm Eagle Clan, Honka Division, I put my right shoe on first, my right arm through the shirt first. I said, don't look at me, because I'll lead you astray, because we're from different divisions. Even though in the same house, we're united, even as we are separated. Yeah, that is critically important to us to maintain that harmony and balance. And the two divisions are associated with maleness and femaleness. The Honka are, the female half, the earth half. So I come from the female half of the world. That doesn't make me any less masculine than anyone in this room. What it does is it allows me to experience being both male and female. Because ultimately, all of us are male and female. All of us are Honka and Sisho, because in our villages, you were always mandated to marry across the street. So we're constantly mixing. And then the couple lives on one side or the other and raises children over there. Originally, the man moved to the woman's half and became a part of her clan. And the kids were raised there. Then after the incursion of colonialism, there was a shift. We won't get into why, but it switched around the other way. Still to this day among Cherokees, your clan is your mother's clan. And it's very difficult for Cherokee men whose mothers are not Cherokee to find a place among the Cherokee in a Cherokee ceremony. That's harmony and balance. That everything we do is about keeping the world in balance. Even when we eat, we understand that these are close relatives we're feasting on. We have to eat corn and buffalo. Except my daughter, she's Buffalo Clan. In order to maintain harmony and balance, that clan has to abstain from buffalo. Except in certain ceremonies, she can have buffalo. But she's really clear that buffalo is not for her, because her job as Buffalo Clan woman is to preserve the relationship between the people and the buffalo. That's how we maintain everyone is involved in keeping the whole balance. So when we eat, no matter what we eat, we're eating close relatives. We have to do something to reestablish harmony and balance. Some way to restore the disruption in the fabric of the universe created by human eating. So as Steve knows, I set food aside for my ancestors, for the Wanagi, for, you all call them spirits, and we've fallen into a habit of calling them spirits, but there's nothing in our world that's immaterial. We're radical materialists. So let's call them ancestors, or primordial Wanagi, in order to make the world right again. So we're constantly bringing the world back into harmony and balance. And it's constantly being disrupted. And wars are the greatest disruption. The killing of people, the killing of animals, the killing of anything. Clear-cutting a forest to make cardboard boxes, the Georgia Pacific routine. Just is unthinkable, yet we see it happening. And somehow we have to find ceremonies to bring things back into harmony and balance again. I want to stop here and get you all involved in the conversation. The stuff of worldview is so complicated. I could go on and talk a little more about that, but I really want to hear from you. The fact that we're in relationship with everything around us, the grass out there, the flowers, the trees, the squirrels, the little birds, the robins, the big birds, they're all our relatives. So when my nephew's son, learning how to use a bow and arrow, killed a small bird, I think it was a robin, nephew said, "Son, let's go clean that bird so you can cook it and eat it, because you can't kill a bird unless you're going to eat it." And so he learned a lesson that day. He cleaned that robin, and his mom baked it up for him, and he had it for supper.
We have some time. Is that on? Yes. We have some time for Q&A, and for the benefit of those watching this lecture remotely, I'm going to ask everybody to speak into the mic, so I'll carry it around to you. Questions?
And the mic will help me here too.
I'm descended from Chincoteague, Cherokee, and Ojibwe on my mother's side. I was born in Kansas. My mother didn't teach me things and say, this is an Indian thing. She just did what she did. Now, fast forward many years, and I have a son, and my son is 3 years old. I'm going to a church, and I'm going to teach in Sunday school. All right? So I'm preparing for the first class. I put up pictures of trees and birds in the sky and everything, and I have the first class, and I said, look, you have a creation that God put you in the middle of this creation, and it's so wonderful to be a part of. And then the director of the Sunday school said, you can't teach that. I said, what? She said, no, you have to teach that God created you and you are special. And then when they understand that, you can get to the child's mother. You and your mother takes care of you. And it ends up to be all about me. Me. And I said, I'm sorry, I can't do that. And she said, well, if you can't do that, then you just have to leave because you can't do that. So I left. And to me, it still seems that that person and those people grew up with a very self-centered view of everything. Everything revolves around them. Whereas my son feels a part of everything and responsible for everything, and that's just an illustrative story.
And indeed, in the 20th century, psychologists put a great deal of effort into describing and defining the process of what they call individuation as a part of a child's growing up. And we simply would do that in a very, very different way. But it was described as a universal, as normal, normative. And then it gets imposed back on us. And somehow we're outside of the norm if we don't individuate that way. Gee, I'm going to keep talking if there are no...
Do you think it's possible to give an account of the Euro-Christian God as person which doesn't entail hierarchy? Or is hierarchy built into the idea of God as person?
Do you think you're equal to God?
Oh, do you want? The idea of like sort of equality is something which is outside. The idea of a relation of equality going across wouldn't make sense, so neither equal nor unequal.
Mm-hmm. Yet it is important if you're talking about harmony and balance. We're all on the same plane. I mean, when one of the prime symbolic representations in most Indian communities is the symbol of the circle. And the circle holds in it all people. The Gahegas is there somewhere. The newest baby is there somewhere. Men, women, children. Not only that, eventually, so are the buffalo, the elk, the deer, the mice, the trees, the mountain, the lake, the river. We're all equal. There is no head of the line. We're all in this circle together. Now, people say, yeah, but you pray to these spirits for help in your ceremonies. Well, first of all, we don't pray. That's a Christian category of cognition. We simply don't do that, even though we use the word these days. The word the missionaries picked to mean pray in Osage, wata, means to talk. And you talk to these people that come from the other world, just like you talk to your neighbors and your brothers and sisters, other people around you. They're not superior to us. In fact, they can't even come into this world unless we, in ceremony, open a portal and invite them in. So they need us as much as we need them. And yeah, they have some ways of helping us, but that doesn't make them superior in any way. Anytime I conceive of a God, one, I've introduced a hierarchy. Necessarily. There's no way to have one. Barbara Mann puts it this way. This is a Seneca scholar at the University of Tulsa. The number one is dysfunctional. Period. Indians counting starts with 2. There have to be 2. There can't be 1. And I think the reason is that it immediately introduces what cognitive linguists call an up-down image schema. And what I'm talking about is a collateral egalitarian image schema, which George Lakoff and folk haven't really thought of yet, because they think their way of seeing the world is universal too. So there are problems even with Lakoff and Johnson and those folks.
Thank you very much for speaking today. My question is for young people who are wanting to do rebalancing inside and do rebalancing in the outer world around us. How would you recommend people who are not coming from an Indian tradition who want to partake or find that a path is through traditional ceremonies, sweat lodges, vision quests, how to do that in a way that's respectful and still truthful?
Well, I'd respectfully invite you to stay away from Indian ceremonies. Because, as we know, going all the way back to the particle research of Heisenberg, when you look at something, you change its behavior. He was talking about electrons, right? It changes the behavior of people. When anthropologists, ethnographers come into Indian community, they immediately change our behavior. And when New Agers come into our ceremonies with all the best of intentions, they change who we are and what we're doing. At the same time, I want to invite you to challenge the worldview you've been born into. You can't change it. You're going to wake up and put your shoes on the same way. I mean, you could, at a surface structure level, to shift from Lakoff to his teacher, Noam Chomsky. You could decide, I'm going to put my left shoe on first every time now and be a Tsi-Sho person. But you're not a Tsi-Sho person. You don't have a Honka half to relate to. So it's merely acting out, as it were. I don't want to discourage it entirely, because I think one important way to shift a worldview is to create ideologies that run counter to the ideologies that support the reigning worldview. I really invite you, more and more people, let me put it to you this way. More and more people across the continent, Christians, are convinced that in fact animals are not lower than human beings. That sort of superiority of humans is being challenged, right? That's a great ideology. It doesn't yet shift the worldview, but eventually it can. The problem is the military-industrial complex isn't buying it. See, up to that point, it's just an individual decision on your part to seek harmony and balance within yourself. That's still Christian. That's not yet what Indians are talking about when we talk about harmony and balance in the community and in the world. But you got to start somewhere. And hence, I don't want to discourage it. I just want to make sure you all know how difficult this is going to be. How really incredibly complex it is. Does that make some sense? Yeah, we have people come out. Sundance is particularly appealing to white New Agers. And they want to come out and have the Sundance experience. They want to dance 4 days in the sun for some reason. With no food and no water. And of course, because there's so many New Agers coming out, we give them food and water at night. Not in a traditional Sundance. So they're not getting the real experience anyway. But they want to do it for a few years. And then, as one woman explained it to me, this was her last time at Sundance. She was going to spend her vacation the next year going to Jamaica to learn about Rastafarians.
A little easier than a Sundance.
Yeah, we call. I don't want to be offensive, but we call them spiritual scalp collectors. Yeah, it's so appealing. And the men want to come out and pierce, and the women keep asking, why can't we pierce? Not realizing that's utterly offensive. Sundances, that would be a violation of women's power to pierce at a Sundance, because that's a men's dance where men sacrifice themselves by piercing and shedding blood in order to gain some measure of equality with women who have a natural ceremony from the beginning of time, the menstrual cycle. It marks them as the creators of life. So that all that disrupts harmony and balance when a woman would come out and try to be a man in that sense.
As a practical matter, how many people can comprise a community? For instance, could all 300 million plus people in the United States be one community in the sense that you're talking about?
That's actually a serious question. It's hard enough, we can't even conceive it in Denver, where the number's only 1/100th of that, 3 million. We've created a world that is not ripe for this kind of understanding or worldview. That's part of the problem. We've created a world in which community doesn't function. I live in a townhome. There are 252 townhomes in this division. I know about 6 people, 6 families. That's not my community. I live there, but I don't really belong with those folks. I've got to go down to the Indian Center to find community, or over to Four Winds American Indian Council, or to Ila School of Theology, where I had some sense of community, but and I suppose y'all do it here at the Divinity School as much as we did it at Ila, talking about we got to do a better job of creating community. It's nearly impossible because every year 1/3 of the students leave. Just when I was getting to know them, they leave me. They graduate and go on to bigger and better things. But that's the structure that we're struggling against when we try to create community. And of course, faculty are less committed to that sort of community. They hide in their offices or work at home. There are a few of us that seem to have more of an open door policy to students, and I always welcome students and their interruptions. So community is a strange thing to talk about. Indians tend to talk about the people. The people.
So I think we have time for just 1 or 2 more questions, and I see 2 hands right over here. So maybe we'll take them together and have you give a response to both together.
Okay.
Following up with the idea of community, just thinking about in Christian discourse, so much happens in the way of belief, and but in Native communities, it's much more about ceremony, and how belief, those different, even just those two different words and practices, also establish relation to particular places, and what you see, how you view those two words, idea of community and also connection to land and place.
So this is building up on the young woman's question earlier about practices, and for me trying to trace more of my indigenous roots, I know that there's very little, like this is more on a global perspective, like trying to trace more of my indigenous roots in places where they do not no longer exist, and trying to understand how to tap into those in a way that's so I'm like trying to speak in a way because I'm so removed generationally from indigenous traditions from my own country, and so how, and coming from a Western perspective, is it even authentic or even valid for me to tap into that?
Yeah.
You know, because of this space, right?
Yeah.
Temporally, geographically.
I have people, have for 30 years, who have come to Four Winds, come in the door looking for some sort of support to reclaim their Indianness. They might have been adopted out as babies because the federal government did a lot of that, breaking up Indian families by sending babies over to white families to be raised. They don't even know what nation they are. Or they may come in and say, I know I'm Indian, but it's only a family memory. And it's almost impossible to help them reclaim themselves. Those who are adopted out, and they come in the door, and by looking at them, I have to guess, they could be full blood, even though blood quantum is not an issue for us. That was invented by the US government too. And it was invented as a way of erasing Indians. If you're less than quarter blood, you can't be Indian anymore. Couldn't access Indian health services, for instance. But those who were adopted out, my only advice for them is, come, we welcome you. We can't exclude you because it wasn't your fault that you were adopted out as a baby. Just know, however old you are, if you're 36, it's going to take you another 36 years to unlearn whiteness and regain Indianness. And most of them can't do it. They've been raised in a white suburb, and they've been discriminated against, skin color racism in the suburbs. And they're struggling with addiction abuse because of trying to self-medicate because of the racism. Yet they were raised in a white suburb by a white family, and within 2 weeks, they want to give advice on how we can solve all the problems of 500 years of colonialism. And I have to remind them, no, your job is to sit and listen, to sit around the fireplace and listen to the elders for the next 36 years. That's hard to do, incredibly hard to do. A few in my time at Four Winds have been successful at that. But it's hard. See, this Euro-Christian worldview is so compelling when that's the water you swim in. The getting distance from it is hard. I've got students who come to me, New Agers, who say, oh, your worldview is exactly mine. No, it ain't. You don't swim in these waters. And I like the fact that you have made some ideological choices that lean towards this direction, but that's not the whole of it. You got a long ways to go. Anthony, remind me what you asked. Give me a couple of words.
Just the words of belief.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. See, that's another word that we don't use. We don't have beliefs, as you intimated. Our ceremonies aren't about teaching kids. They're about getting kids active, doing the ceremony. Oh, sure, we tell them stories, little bits and pieces. As Alfonso Ortiz told me, we tell kids one set of stories. And when they're older, we tell them a different set of stories, or we expand the story. And when they get a little older, when they're middle-aged, they hear that story a whole different way, because it takes that long to bring them along. But they're active in doing from the very beginning. When I first got to Isla, students conned me into doing a retreat for them. And after that, I resisted, because it became just problematic. But the week before the retreat, I went up into the mountains with the leaders of the retreat. And we went up behind the retreat house where we were going to meet and climbed a mountain, went up about 1.5 miles, looking for an ideal site to have what you all call prayer. Found a site, and I had brought a little sage with me and a lighter and an eagle fan. So I asked students permission to prepare this site for their coming back in a week. So I called in the Wanagi and said some words to them and smudged the whole site with the smoke from this burning sage, sending off all negative energies. And told them when I came back I'd have cedar for them to call in the positive energies. And when I was done, we started walking back down the mountain. And 2 students were just really quiet. That was appropriate. I had nothing to say. I'd done what I needed to do. And about halfway down the mountain, the students couldn't restrain themselves anymore. They had to ask. And they started by saying, "Oh, that was powerful." Then came the Euro-Christian question. What did it mean? I said, and I gave them a quick answer, talking about incense in the Old Testament, right? I said, there, I've told you more than I've ever told anybody in my life, and more than anyone's ever told me about this ceremony. Never told my kids. They know what to do, and they do that ceremony themselves now. At home or in ceremony, for me they'll do it. Even my youngest child knows how to do that. She has her own feather. When she moved in, I picked a feather for her, nice big wing feather, medial wing feather, and had a friend bead it for her. And she knows how to deal with that. I've never told her any of that. It's the doing. Because as soon as I think I need to teach her. I've introduced hierarchy again. And we don't do that unless it's a situation with elders and young people that calls for talking and telling stories. And then we'll tell the stories and talk. But she's got to learn this on her own from doing it. Listen, we don't have the word belief. No Indian kids are asked to believe anything that they haven't experienced, seen with their own eyes, tasted, smelled, touched. Because we work on the basis of what we know, not what we believe. Because faith, again, introduces hierarchy, because I've got to have faith in something that is superior to me, that is somehow helpful to me. That's a hard one to grasp. And I spent my early career, Greg, learning how to unpack those words like pistis and pisteo and et cetera. And I'm not sure pisteo means, we don't have a word for it in English, right? We have to make up language. Have faith. Pisteo doesn't mean to have something tangible you can hold on to. Or we make it cerebral. We use believe, because we don't have the word to faith. And if we had that word and could fill it with some meaning, I might find it useful. But believing leaves me uninterested.
Tink, I think we're going to have to wrap it up here. Thank you so much. I think you will all agree that Tink has given us a lot to think about tonight. And please join me in thanking him for this.